She's my neighbor. She's Sly's auntie and Pisces twin. She's my favorite comedian. One of my best friends, Barbie core icon, and intellectual baddie. Welcome to High Low, Ziwe.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
I'm so happy you're here.
I'm so excited to be here. This is going to be such a fun conversation.
This is really exciting because, you know, I did your show and it feels very full circle. It feels really exciting. But leading up to it, I was kind of nervous.
Why were you nervous?
Because I think I have so much respect for the persona that you've crafted and this caricature and this woman that people know as Ziwe. And she is the visual, she has her attitude and everything. And then there's the Ziwe I know who, like comes over to my house hungover and like jumps on my couch. And I was trying to think about how to be respectful of the persona while also giving people a glimpse into the Ziwe that I like adore and love. I want to talk about that duality, that relationship. Where was Ziwe that we've seen first on Instagram Live, Baited, and now on your incredible show, which shout out November 18th,
yes.
New season premieres. First episode is Michael Che and Julia Fox.
Yes.
So everyone should be really excited about that. Tune in. How did that persona start? Like where did she come from inside of you? What was she born of?
Totally. I think that like I have been working through iterations of what is currently the Showtime version of that character, first on Instagram or like most recently on Instagram Live, but before that on YouTube. I started that web series the day that Hillary Clinton, the day after she lost the election in 2016, at this like website. And because I was just interviewing a bunch of my like coworkers, and I thought it was so funny, like the differences in conversation. And so
what do you mean by the
differences in conversation? Just being like, it was a really homogenous workspace. And so just like as a Black woman, just being like, what are you saying? And then prior to that, just a lifetime of like being a Black woman who exists outside and having people come up to me randomly and be like, my Black nanny is great. And me being like, why would you bring that up? Like, why did you say that? We're at a Wendy's. Like, what are you talking about? And so I always wish that I had a camera in front of me for those really awkward interactions because they're so like laughably outrageous. And so finally I have that camera in front of people for those interactions.
Well, it's interesting. I feel like there's two things. There's the genesis of the show, but then there's also the genesis of like the look of Ziwe, the Barbie core, the kind of like bimbo. There's something you said on Meghan Markle's podcast. You said, that's why I wear pink. That's why my character is so hyper feminine. It's because it sort of codifies the message of the show. I think it's like Barbie packaging and then you bite into the sandwich and it's barbed wire. Can you talk about that? Like, did you always dress like that in your life? I mean, how did that part of kind of this persona and this character come to be?
Sure. I've always had an affinity for like flamboyant dressing. Like I love marabou and velvet and like faux fur. I find it to be, even what I'm wearing now is like this felt. So I've always had an affinity for that. But particularly in the show, when you think of, it's like a deconstruction of media and late night and interviews. And typically late night is like dominated by men, all named James, who wear suits that are blue, black, or brown. And when women break into the space, they're sort of like by choice or by like mandate, they also wear suits. And so I thought it would be really interesting to assume that role and still like pay homage to like the hyper feminine element of like being a woman in the world and like wearing skirts and wearing dresses and like it being so distinctly the opposite of like the hyper James, Jimmy late night complex.
And it's sort of like this like soft, you're like packaging something really sweetly and also kind of inviting people to like write you off. I mean, I've watched you on other talk shows. Like I watched you on Trevor Noah's and you do this like kind of Barbie wave, beauty pageant. Like I want to understand her. I want to understand the Ziwe that the public knows and this character that you have created because it's also in her attitude, not just the way she dresses, right?
Yeah.
And it is about subverting expectations or
it is about subverting expectations. Like femininity is seen in like a derogatory way, especially in intellectual spaces. And you have to sort of like codify that element of you and like put it away in a corner because you don't want to come off as have a voice that's too shrill or not care about important things like football and basketball, because all the guys that are like rubbing elbows and like existing in this fraternity care about that. Like there's something really like derogatory about liking Real Housewives, even though that's like my version of sports and it's something that has a big audience, but it's like low brow. And so for me, it's about like, how do you reclaim femininity? I remember growing up, I was a tomboy and my mother would try to put me in dresses and I would like refuse. I don't want to wear a dress. I want to be like the guys. But what I meant by that is like, I wanted to be liberated. Like,
did you just want to be taken seriously?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I didn't, as a kid, when I was like, I don't want to wear dresses. I want to be like the guys and wear pants. It wasn't specifically about the pants. It was more about like what pants offered, which is liberation. Exactly. Right. To me, pants was like, okay, boys get to like talk, do whatever they want. They don't have to cook. They don't have to clean. They get to fart and like sit with their legs open. And that's like, okay. Whereas as a young woman, you're like over policed. Yeah. And so like, as I got older, I started to embrace femininity from my like childhood and really appreciate the fact that it's like not a sign of weakness. It's not a sign of stupidity. It can be a sign of power.
And when did that shift happen? How did that shift happen?
When did it happen? I think it happened, it was gradual, but it probably started happening in college. I think like the older you get, the more you realize that you are who you are and you don't need to adjust yourself so much for like people's consumption. And so like...
And you were like, I like pink. Or was it a choice to say, I like pink, and that's because I want to I want to bring pink. Femininity to, Yeah,
I like pink. It's I don't know if it's my favorite color, but maybe I should say it is. It is for my brand. I like the color pink, but it's more so that pink represents like girl. Yeah. Right? What does it mean to be a girl in like the media space, right? Like you're hypersexualized. Like you're not really valued for your intellect. Yeah.
What I like about what you're saying is I feel like you're doing two things at the same time. You're basically saying like you're almost playing into the way that people want to see a woman, right? Which is sexualized, pretty. We've talked about that before, like looking pretty on camera and how like that's important for what the message, for people to understand what you're trying to do and even pay attention. You kind of have to present yourself in a certain way and like have a snatched waistline and the right eye makeup and whatever. So you know the game, you recognized it and you're like, that's great. But also you're kind of doing some kind of performance art around femininity and the assumptions we have about smart women.
You know, people always used to refer to me as a performance artist when I was first starting. And I hated it. I thought it was so insulting. Like, I'm not a performance artist. I'm a comedian. Yeah. You know, I need to be taken seriously as a clown. But now the older I get, the more I realize like this is a version of drag that I'm doing. But I think of like Colbert Report, right? Like he's doing the like, what is it, Bill O'Reilly character, like hyper Americana. Yeah. And so I'm doing the like hyper feminine version of like a daytime talk show host. Right. So it's like it's extremist almost. It's like the set isn't just a little pink. It's like laughably pink to the point where in color correction sessions, where like my eyes look like they're pink because there's so much, because the pink is reflecting on my body. Like I say goo goo gaga like a cute little baby.
I've picked that up.
Yeah,
by the
it's
way.
wild.
Yeah.
But that's again, it's like it's all sort of like a satire, hyperbole of like what it means to be a woman, like in the public sphere.
Yeah, it's just interesting how you're how that actually hits, because it's so intentional, which by the way, that's the other thing that I really love about you. And I have learned this about comedians in general, but I think that you specifically, you are very mastermind, a la the Taylor Swift song. Have you listened to it?
I'm loving Taylor Swift right now.
Me too. I'm loving Taylor Swift. You already know.
Yeah. Just for revenge.
That line. Actually, a woman came up to me last night and was like, you have to make a TikTok to that song.
It's good.
Specifically. Maybe we should make that. today.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, but I'm not really good at the transitions on TikTok.
You know that I love to do the editing for you.
That's true. That's true. I'll send you some clips and you can source it.
Well, I want to get back to the genesis of the show a little bit more because I think that's really interesting too. There's the caricature, but then there's also just the content of the show and those uncomfortable conversations. And I know you went to boarding school. You went to Andover.
Yeah, I went to boarding school.
And we've talked about that a lot privately, but you don't really talk about that so much publicly. Would you want to talk about that experience today?
Sure, but it's more like, what kind of loser talks about high school all the time?
Well,
grow up, dude.
I think that it's your villain,
It's your formative years.
Villain origin story.
My villain origin story?
Have you heard that before?
Please explain.
Have you heard it?
No.
The term? Oh,
I've heard it from like Marvel, like when Peter Parker sees that guy and he's like, I'm not going to help him. And then he ends up shooting Uncle Ben.
So now the phrase has been kind of reused in a way where the villain, it's kind of amazing, right? It's like, how did this amazing character come to be? How did the Joker become the Joker? How did Poison Ivy become Poison Ivy? And I'm thinking about you in your essentially superhero costume as this like hyper feminine, talk show host who has, who's doing a lot of smart things, saying and revealing a lot of interesting dynamics and things about politics in our world. I want to know how that person came to be. And so I do think that high school was your villain. Just like how when you were a kid, wearing pants. So if you don't want to talk about it, you don't have to, obviously.
I wouldn't say my villain origin story starts with high school. I think it starts with I think it starts like early ages and just having like, if you come out of your mother's womb and you open your eyes, you experience racial constructs. Yeah. Like against your will. Of course. Like who wants to, but just like babies do, right? Yep. Like, so it's not that it happened at 14, my life changed. It was more so that like every single stage of my life has expanded my understanding of like American culture. And so I grew up like in this in this immigrant city in like Massachusetts, and then you go to a boarding school which is like super deeply homogenous, and like you go from having like a student body that's like majority Dominican to like not that. And so you just constantly are shifting your perspective. I went from New England and then I moved to Chicago, and then suddenly you have a different perspective of like, okay, everyone's a little passive aggressive over here. Like what's that going on? So it's like I'm my character is created from the adjustments I've made moving through life. And the character constantly shifts, like because 2016 is slightly different than 2020, which is slightly different than 2022. And the show has kind of been consistent in like its subject matter, but it popped off in 2022 or 2020 because it aligned with like the national discourse.
Of course.
Yeah.
Well, I think it is interesting that the show started after Hillary lost the election. Yeah. Because I read something that you said, I don't know on what, but you were talking about being in college when Obama was president, and people were kind of in this like, it's a post-racist world, which is insane to think about now. But I do remember that conversation happening. Like, we have a black man for president. Everything's different now.
It was so, I mean, what a weird experience. Like, we have lived through so many like watershed moments. I am tired of the watershedding. And so I remember in 2008, Obama won. And then you have this moment where it's like, racism is dead. And then every headline about him were like, that evil devil wearing that tan suit wants to kill babies. It's crazy. Like, oh my God, this is so overwhelming. And you're meant to, and also like, as a kid, as a teenager, I didn't really have the vocabulary to process what's happening to me. Like if racism's happening to me, if like, and I'm being treated differently or like how to defend myself or anything. Right. Like you're just like, I guess I am wrong. I guess racism is over. I guess Boston is the home of peace, love.
And were those the conversations that were happening in your like school and your education? Like, cause you were in high school, right? When Obama was elected, and then you were in college. So is that like the tone of kind of of your peers?
Is what the tone of my peers?
Were they sort of saying to you, was there this feeling of like your experiences aren't real?
I don't think I felt my experiences were real until I studied like African American studies in college. Wow. And suddenly had this understanding that's like, freedom riders, you mean to tell me they rode on this bus and they got beat up because they'd go to like these diners and try to sit in like these segregated places. And like, I just had no idea what that stuff was. So you'd hear about like, you just read. And I read so much that I had an understanding of what America was that was not in line with how I was educated prior, honestly. So it wasn't like, oh, it was to your question, which was like, did you think that this is how everyone was talking? I feel like that was national discourse. National discourse in 2008 was, wow, yes, we can. Yes, we can push the boundaries of American society and do this monumental thing with this monumental person. And this will change us forever. And it did change us forever. And we're watching like a sort of backlash about that.
Well, Trump, obviously, but now it's continued as well.
Yeah, it's like it's only gotten more fervor. It's really intense. So sure, that was my high school experience. That was my high school experience. But I also am from Massachusetts, where in Massachusetts you're told, I don't know if you've heard about this thing called the Confederacy, but those guys, terrible. Union, baddies. And so you're left being like, wow, we did it. The Underground Railroad.
Right, right.
You know, like it's beyond. And so it's this like constant. History is written by the victors.
Right.
And so you read history books and you have really no comprehension for like the full story. And you only after like interrogation do you understand that like the world is not a perfect place.
So a lot of your sort of awakening happened in college.
Definitely. Yeah. My awakening happened in college. Absolutely. Yeah, because that's when I like discovered African-American studies as like a subject matter by like doing a bunch of majors and being like, oh, I'm not interested in this. I'm not interested in this, but I love history. Right. Okay. And that was something that I could read endlessly.
And then how did you know that you wanted to make things about race and have these conversations and also do comedy? Like, when did you start to know? I know you were writing comedy, but like where did that kind of come together for you?
It wasn't so... there's no moment in life that is like a light switch for me. Like everything is gradual and process. And so how I came to having comedy that's about race is that it's so hard to describe, because let's go back to 2020, Instagram Live. That's what sold my show. Basically, every single comedian and their mom was like going live on IG Live during that period. Yeah. And so I wanted to go live too. And I didn't know what to do live, but I did live shows in Brooklyn and we did like musical songs. And I did that and they were floppy on us. Okay, what is like a low production, easy thing to do on a consistent basis that's a show that I can do? What if I interviewed people and asked them questions? Okay, what questions am I going to ask them? I've run out of questions. I don't know, how many Black friends do you have? And that it took off, but that wasn't like me intentionally thinking, okay, I know a question that's really gonna freak him. How many Black friends, you know?
Yeah.
And so if you're going even before that, how did I come to the place where I'm like, my comedy is about race? It's not all about race. Like I'm still a working writer. Like I'm writing a bunch of movies right now that have nothing to do with race. Like I've worked on Dickinson. That's not like a race show.
Yeah, of course.
But conversely, like with this interview that I'm doing, it's just like, what is interesting for me to talk about that I can talk about endlessly. That's interesting. And that is something that I found over time. I was like a big fan of Between Two Ferns and Eric Andre's show and Colbert Report. And I thought what I liked about those two previous shows is that they were so uncomfortable. And what I noticed from a lifetime of being a Black woman is like race makes people deeply uncomfortable. And what I learned from Colbert Report was like, you can say anything you want if you're funny. And I watched him do the
that's so profound.
Right? I watched him do the White House Correspondents' Dinner where he was joking about shooting someone in the face in front of the president. And I thought, oh my goodness gracious, like you're allowed to say that? Like satire, the power of satire, you know?
It's very powerful. It's and you've mastered it.
And so that was that was me combining a bunch of things that I liked into like a soup. And with race being like a big ingredient because this is my identity.
It's funny. I just am remembering thinking about just back to the look of the show because I do think that's so brilliant and I'm fascinated by it. Like you were doing the eyeliner, like little bit of color eyeliner, but you hadn't leaned into the Barbie core yet.
No, because honestly, I was producing that show in my Bushwick apartment. And I had like the makeup that was in my house from like, I used to be like a beauty journalist. So I had makeup in my house from then. And then I had the clothes I had in my house from whatever.
When you started doing Baited and the Instagram lives, did you think like, holy shit, I have something? Or was it a slower, gradual
It's like
build?
a slower, gradual thing. And I almost stopped doing it because the George Floyd protest started and I felt like, oh, is it insensitive to like to do anything like in the midst of this sort of national global tragedy? And that my friend convinced me to just keep doing the interviews, Hunter, who's actually the showrunner of my show. And so but I'm a producer. I've been working in live shows for 10 years. So I know how to produce a good show. Like my pop shows were always popping. And so I booked Caroline Calloway, and that was like a good interview. And then it's like, okay, I'm booking the show myself. Who am I DMing? Like, what's going on in discourse? Okay, Allison Roman, I'll book her. And then she says, yes, great, amazing, thanks. And who's else? Okay, Rose McGowan. Okay, Alyssa Milano. But I was like booking it. I was talent producing. So I had an understanding of like what these consecutive guests would add to the conversation, but I didn't know that the thing that I had been doing for years would suddenly meet the moment, or I guess the moment would meet it.
This brings me to another thing that I really admire about you. I've seen you do live shows. I've been on your set. And I also just like, we talk a lot about work and how to manage and how to be a producer of the show, literally, but also just a producer of your career.
Yeah.
And you are so good at it.
I think
it's something I really admire about you. You're great at delegating. You're great at asking for what you want, for saying what you want. And as a white woman, that's something I struggle with. I am curious.
Asking what you want?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Even just honestly figuring out what I want and then saying it.
Yeah.
And even when I know, like, this is my show, this is my thing, like I should be doing whatever. I want to know, where did that come from and why are you so good at that? How are you so good at that? Teach me your ways.
Time. You know, people always ask me that, and I wish the best answer is just like, I don't feel like I'm good at it. It took a really long time. I think I've been really lucky enough to see people in power who are really inconsequential. And that has given me the confidence to know that if they can do it, I can do it too, truly. So it's being able to be behind the curtain and see, okay, this is how things are made. Chaos. No one knows what they're doing. And that's something you realize, especially the older you get, is like everyone's kind of making it up. So that has allowed me to make it up as well.
And not feel bad about advocating for what you want. And
I feel guilt about advocating for what I want, but I'm not gonna not advocate for what I want because Joe over here is gonna get it for free. Yeah. You know, like he won't even have to advocate and he gets the gig. So it's like I have to be really tenacious.
So you basically do it because you're out of survival.
I do it. To be a woman that exists, or a gender non-conforming person that exists, is to be constantly like bombarded with the fact that you are other, you are different, and you're not good enough. And what I like to do is I like to say, wow, that really hurts my feelings. And then I like to say, I'm going to do it anyway and really push forward. So that's been like my main, that's my practice. But I wouldn't say like I wake up every day and I'm like, I'm so confident. Right. Everyone loves me. I've never been so strong. Like that's not a realistic painting of who I am. But I don't let like external opinions like that like mess with me because people really tried it. When I was first coming up, the things that people would say to me, haters. You meet haters. And
what
haters
would they say?
They would just be like, I remember I had this one improv teacher who was like, you ask too many questions. And then he also said that I don't react in a way that was normal. And famously, I'm famous for my questions and the way I react to them. So
you
people
leaned the fuck in.
People don't know what they're talking about, right? If they knew what was going to be hot next, they would make it hot next, right? And so it's like, and even with my my interview show that started like 2016, what was wild about that is that it was a flop. Like, oh yeah, you know, I had the golden ticket. I figured it out. It was a flop. Right. No one watched it. It had 200 subscribers. I was at a loss, like $2,000 when I didn't have $2,000 to be spending on like shooting videos. And I just sort of like remained steadfast and believed in myself because because I was creating art that entertained me first and foremost.
Yeah.
And that's like the trap that a lot of like young creators fall into, is that they're like seeing like what's hot, like, oh, this guy made it, that maybe, but you have no idea like what's behind the curtain, like why they made it, if it's actually good, if it'll actually be good in 5 years. But I get a lot of pride knowing that like the work that I created, that like I drop it on TikTok from like 2016 and it gets like 7 million views. Like, that's weird because I thought it sucked. I thought it was terrible.
Well, you talk about this all the time where you're like, you just don't know. So you just have to do what you think is great and stick to your own POV, and then you produce something interesting and at least consistent. Yeah.
Did that answer your question?
Absolutely. Yeah. More than answered my question. Yeah. I know you to be a sensitive person. So
I'm deeply sensitive.
That's why when I watch you in this mode, I'm so impressed, is because I know that it isn't just an easy, like, oh, I'm just so confident, whatever. You're actually so good. You were on Meghan Markle's podcast talking about anger. And I'm fascinated by anger and female rage. And obviously there you're talking about this awful trope of Black female rage. What I've seen is you take your anger and your sensitivity and you turn it into art. You intellectualize it, and you have a new thought, just as your friend, like even when it's just something in the news comes up and you're angry about it, you're like, okay, well, this is what this means to me. And this is then you take your original thought around that thing and you turn it into a joke, which is so amazing. I don't know. I just think it's a really incredible process that you go through. And I wonder if that's something that has always been a way you process your anger, or what? It's very justified anger.
I think laughter is a trauma response. My friend Hunter says that. That's how I cope with things that are sad, is I laugh. I don't want to deal with being upset.
You leave.
I laugh or I leave, and I will leave. I'll walk out of that room. And so,
or you say dark energy.
I say, and I mean it.
Times.
If it's a dark energy, I will say it.
She'll be like, dark energy, dark energy, dark energy, and then just bails. And I'm like, okay, great. Thanks so much.
As a Pisces, I cannot afford to take on that emotional weight.
I understand.
But I that's how I process the world, is through laughter. Because life is suffering, one. And then two, every year of my life, I've learned so much about myself and so much about the world that I cannot say, I can't get on any sort of soapbox and be like, this is the way the world should be. Like, I just can't.
Yeah.
And so, but laughter and making jokes about it allows me to understand like my POV and like what is funny about that POV, and like how do I process it versus how do other people process. And so what's interesting about my show is like an interview like Michael Che, like, or Julia Fox. You'll hear quotes and you'll have people of any background will have different reactions to it. Like with the Chet Hanks interview, like some people were like, I'm so proud of him for not apologizing. And other people were like, I can't believe he did that accent. And it's like you're watching the same episode and people feel strongly about it in opposite directions. And so like my work is meant to evoke thought.
Totally.
And so I think that the jokes help people feel like they're not judged, because I cannot judge. Yeah, I can only judge myself.
Yeah, it also just makes me really, again, kind of double down on the idea that you are a performance artist, because, just because you're taking emotion and you're turning it into something, which I think a lot of comedians do. But because so much of your emotions around these personal experiences are personal, it feels like art to me in a different way than a lot of comedy is.
I feel that. Sometimes I work, like it's two things, right? Because on the one hand, it's like, okay, to be like Black and conscious means that you're in a perpetual state of rage. Yeah. So it's like, what do you do with that? Okay, I have to go to Kmart. I still have to go to the grocery store and get my snacks. But then it's also like, are only women called performance artists? Like, is Nathan like Fielder a performance artist?
I think of him as a performance artist, but I think it's an interesting point what you're saying.
Yeah.
But what's really interesting about what you just said is like, it's literally, you couldn't survive with that rage. You have to do something with it.
I have to direct it in somewhere positive, but you don't have to. Some people, if you want to stab someone, I get it. Who am I to judge? I'm not a judge.
Retweet.
Just don't do it on camera. I'm not endorsing stabbing.
I want to talk about our friendship.
Sure.
This is something you brought up to me a couple months ago.
Oh, yes. In Paris.
In Paris.
Yeah.
Because people know we're friends. And we, sometimes when we do press and whatever, we're also neighbors. And when we do press, people will say things like, so what do you guys do? What do you talk about?
Yeah, I get that a lot.
And you brought it up to me and you're like, why is this a thing? Why do people always ask me what we talk about? Like, what do they think? And I was kind of like, oh, I don't know. I felt a little bit, my first reaction was, oh, it's because like they think, I felt embarrassed and like ashamed. Like, oh, they just like, how could you be friends with a little bit? That's why I didn't dive in right away. Yeah, that's why I didn't dive in. We didn't talk about that.
Know that.
Yeah, because I was like, oh, well, they just are surprised. They think I'm not like smart enough or something, maybe. Yeah, I don't know.
Your book.
Thanks, girl.
It's a good book.
Hey, that's how we became friends.
Yeah.
Yeah, you read my book.
Yeah. I thought it's a good book. I thought it was a good book.
Was, by the way, the #1 promoter of my book.
I sold that book.
She sold that damn book. The first time we went to dinner together, there was
Tell the story.
This is my favorite story.
It's a wild story.
This man approached us.
Who might listen?
I don't remember his name. I did unfollow him on Instagram.
Yeah.
But he came up and he asked to take a picture.
Yeah.
And you were like, you can take her picture, but you need to buy 40 copies of her book.
No, that's not what happened. It was he was like, you take a picture. I'm like, buy a book.
Oh, that's right.
And then he was like, I'll buy 10. And then I said, buy 40.
Like you specifically said 40.
Yeah.
Because then what happened is he was like, oh, okay. He got really excited basically because he was like, this is amazing. They're engaging with me, whatever. And the thing that was so painful is that you can only buy 30 books on Amazon. So we had to watch him check out with 30, then go back, then check out with 10. Yeah. But he did get his picture and you sold 40 books for me, which it was in the pre-sale days. And that's what counts to the New York Times bestseller list. So it's really important.
Okay, shout out.
So thank you so much.
Okay, so when I release my book, we have to go to the club and we have to get the cuties.
I will get a banner.
Yeah, get a cutie to get a book.
Bottle service.
We're at Lavo talking about who want to buy a book. 40 books.
Do you have a title for your book yet?
It's called The Book of Ziwe right now. So yes, that's the title for now.
So
I don't
I'm
know what
just
it's called.
picturing that in sparklers. Book of Ziwe, bitch.
And we're wearing like Playboy bunny ears.
Yes, hot.
Yeah.
We should have done that for Halloween.
Subverting culture.
We should have done that for Halloween. It's okay next year. Anyway, where was I? Oh, about getting about people being like, what do we talk about? And you had a hot take.
No, you had the hot take was yours, and I yes anded.
Okay.
Because the take is like, we have such extreme POVs in the public space that someone will see you and think, okay, this is a supermodel. Like what she talks about, like linen. And then someone can see me and think like, this is like this radical. And all she talks about is like Foucault. And that was like the disconnect, right?
Yeah.
Like our stereotypes, our archetypes are like at odds with each other fundamentally. But that you pitched that.
But then I think we realized that it's very insulting for both of us, essentially, right? And that's where I thought you had a really interesting point. You kind of you went a level deeper.
I think that to be in public, there's a level. At least I can speak for my career, right? Like there's a level of projection I'm constantly fielding. I think I talked about this on Meghan Markle's podcast, where if I say to someone like, may I have a drink of water? They're like, this harpy punched me for agua. And it's like I have to be really careful with my tone so as not to convey any emotion other than serene delight.
I mean, you keep a happy face on sometimes, even when you're pissed. I've seen you
because it is so easy to get a reputation as being evil or difficult, and when you're really asking for like the bare minimum of what like Spencer George 14 would ask for, right? And he would like throw his phone at you too.
And people would think it like is sexy and powerful.
It's like he did it. You know, Nicki Minaj has a quote about it where she says like, he bought when Lil Wayne asked for the things, he's bossed up. But when I complain, I get the pickle juice. And she like leaves like a photo shoot or something like that. And so I try to really be like, I really try to not lead with that projection so I can like get to the point. Like Toni Morrison talks about how like the most annoying thing about racism is the fact that it wastes your time. Like you have to you're not starting at 1, you're starting at -10 because you're just convincing people that you're of value.
That's draining.
Firstly, you have to get to the place where you're of value. You have to get to the place where you're good enough to write, good enough to act, good enough to whatever, good enough to do accounting. And then you have to convince people to open the door for you. And so for me, like part of being like a front-facing woman performer that's Black is that people, and there's a lore around me is scary that I hog tie my guests to the set and put a camera in their face and make them answer questions when that's obviously not the case. They're consenting adults, but that's the perception. And so
people say that to me, back to kind of what we were just talking about. They'll always be like, she scares me. Like, what's she like? Yeah.
And as if I punch people. And so I have to like work against that constantly. And even though I work against it, it's still not enough.
I think about what that Toni Morrison quote is amazing. I'd actually never heard that before.
Shout out to Toni.
Shout out to Toni. But I mean, just time is so valuable. Yeah. It's actually, there's this really amazing book called This Life, Martin Haglin, this Marxist philosopher, who basically is like the most valuable thing in life is our time.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what all capital that is the ultimate capital is time. So thinking about how that capital gets wasted on proving yourself, on the energy that being other, right, perceived as other takes is awful.
It's not what I would call ideal.
Right.
It's not.
You'd rather it be different.
It's not ideal, but it is like survival. A lot of my skills are purely survival.
Yeah. It's interesting to realize that though, because you are producing things that aren't just, it doesn't feel like you're just surviving. It seems like you're thriving.
I'm flourishing.
But it's interesting to realize that so much of the root of your work is about survival.
Because my work is for me. And like, I'm really, really fortunate that there are people in this world that find it entertaining and enjoy it. But fundamentally, it is to like heal the wounds that I have. It is to like tickle the funny bones that I have. It is to like open the doors that I want.
Yeah, because there's a lot of stuff. I always try to push you after like a couple glasses of wine.
I know, you really do. We should talk about that. Do you want to talk about that?
Sure, you asked me about it.
Well, I think it's okay. So a source of our biggest contention between us would be that your direction pitches for my show. You think that they can be more. You think the show could be more aggressive.
I want you to lean in, and you say, easy for you to say, you white bitch.
Yeah, exactly. Because what does lean in look to you, and how is it not leaned in?
No, I just think that when you went into Showtime, and one of the questions I do want to get to is sort of like what your master plan is and what you want to do, because I think a lot of people underestimate your goals a lot of the time, and you are planning on taking over the world, which is amazing. But the tone changed a little bit, obviously, which I think was for a multitude of reasons. And you keep saying to me like, girl, I have to book guests. I need to book guests. And you're fighting against all of these stereotypes, and you're doing all this thing. And I'm like, lean in, do it more, because I want you to have the most popping viral moments. Yeah. But at what cost? What cost? And I know, I understand it. Just, when we talk about it, I'm like, well, I want all the viral moments. So,
I think it's, for me, the interesting element to this conversation. There's so many elements to that conversation, because it's like, on the one hand, like, this is a comedy show with really high expectations, right? Because it's like functioning as a journalism show. Like, this is an interview show, and it also is supposed to make you feel laughter, but it also needs catharsis to relieve the tension, because otherwise it doesn't work. Like in writing, it doesn't work if it doesn't if it doesn't like come to a conclusion that feels like cathartic. So that's like one element, which is just like, how do you artistically make this kind of show? Yeah. But then there's the other element, which is like, I am not like an aggressive person. No, you're not. I'm not. And so it's like,
you're actually so not aggressive.
I'm really not aggressive.
Even just being out with you, sometimes I wish you were more aggressive.
Yeah, I just don't. I think, but
you do advocate for yourself on set and and in your work. But yeah,
but I get painted as aggressive. I know, but I'm not aggressive.
On all the interviews and press that I was watching to prep for this, because I hadn't seen all of it, obviously. That's like the number one question that they go to is kind of like, ooh, spooky Ziwe, like spooky. Even if they're joking, there's this kind of feeling of like, You're so aggressive. Should we talk about your aggression?
Yeah, it's like a stereotype.
Yeah.
Does Howard Stern get called aggressive like that?
No, he doesn't.
Does
And
Nathan
I mean,
Fielder
he
get
is
called
aggressive. Howard Stern is aggressive. Yeah.
You've been interviewed by him?
I have, but I've also just watched past interviews, and the way he words things can be, I mean, it's just aggressive. It's not even passive aggressive. It's just aggressive. Yeah. And it's pretty shocking to watch sometimes.
Yeah, it's really direct. I think of like my interviews also come from the schoolhouse of the Oprah Winfrey Industrial Complex, the Howard Stern Industrial Complex, and the Andy Cohen Industrial Complex. You watch those shows, their interviews are really to the point and really get you like interesting information that you could not hear anywhere else. And so if I'm talking to Charlemagne, Fran Lebowitz, Andrew Yang, Phoebe Bridgers, EmRata, like Julia Fox, Michael Che, if you're talking to these people have all been interviewed ad nauseum. They have said all that there is to say. Yeah. So you have to find like interesting points that feel new and fresh and don't feel like a redundant interview, right? And so like my comedy uses aggression like as like a source of like fodder, but to be at 10 the whole time, to me, is not a dynamic performance.
Well, what's interesting about it is you are the person who said to me, like, I just pose questions. People don't have to answer them.
No.
And it's, and that was my tactic on your show. I was just like, I would never answer
people
that
got so
question. They were
mad.
so mad. They were so mad.
Yeah.
But for me, it was like, well, that's, you know, I'm here on the show. I'm going to promote the show. I love what you're doing. But yeah, I'm not going to answer that fucked up question. What's interesting is about what I like so much about the tension on the show is the obligation people feel to answer the questions.
Yeah.
That is the most interesting part for me.
It's really, really weird, and it's consistent of before my life in interviews, right? Because all my life, you've seen this in public, people will come up to me and say really weird stuff.
Yeah, they say crazy shit
weird
to you.
Stuff. They'll say like, one time we were at the club and this person came up to me and said like, you know, I don't listen to Michael Jackson. And I was like,
no, that was insane. We just had met her.
Yeah,
and she looked at you and was like, we were having a conversation in general. And then all of a sudden out of nowhere, she was like, you know, I don't listen to Michael Jackson. And looked at you like she wanted you to
I don't know
give
what she
her
wanted.
something, to validate something. Yeah. It was bizarre.
And so if you can imagine, every hour of every day I get a confession. And that's just not since after the show. All my life, every day I'll get a confession about their racist grandparents.
Guilt?
Like, I couldn't tell you what my magic is. Maybe it's the fact that I listen. Like, I'm a listener. There's nothing wrong.
But isn't it interesting? It's like they don't even need you to actually say anything to them. Just the existence of your thought patterns and how your POV makes them aware of their racism.
You think that's what
I think that happens sometimes. It's like when you play somebody your music for the first time and you hear it from their perspective and you're like, oh, that's exactly what the song is actually being perceived as or what it's all about. I feel like it's almost like your POV does that to people. And,
I think it's
and
projection.
then they cut themselves open. It's totally projection.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. No, it's like, it's not about me in that space. It's about how they perceive that I would react.
Yeah.
Yeah. So again, back to the aggressiveness. It's like, be more aggressive. Like, I breathed and people sense aggression. I could kiss a baby on the forehead and high five a nun and people would say I was aggressive. So it's like all I can do consistently is be myself.
Even when you say please and thank you, people think you're aggressive.
Yeah. And so I think it's more comedic to me to just like exist in the space that I want to exist in. And I will get exactly what people give. And that I find to be interesting. There's no...
You suck your thumb and go, cuckoo caca.
Yeah.
How many black friends do you have?
Yeah, like it's just, that's like, I think that's enough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Totally. Okay, so we're coming to the end of our interview. And one thing I know about you is that you have an arsenal of quotes. We got a couple today.
Oh, gosh.
You do. You have so many good ones. But I think you really study people that you look up to, and you take parts of their career and who they are and you emulate and you learn. You're kind of a student, and Oprah is one of the. So what are the big goals? What's the long-term plan for Ziwe? And who do you hope to emulate and which parts?
I hope to be Halliburton's first influencer, and I'm looking forward to emulating my icon, Condoleezza Rice.
I know you're not kidding.
Mortar. We were in the same honor society. She's like slightly older than me, but
I didn't know that.
Yeah, mortar. It's called mortar, mortar, but it sounds like motorboard. Motorboard honor society.
Ziwe knows some like Illuminati shit. That's another thing that people don't know about you.
It's true. Goo goo gaga.
You have taught me so much about the Illuminati. I swear to God.
Honestly, it's all from just like listening to the Daily, being like, oh.
That's not true. This is some boarding school shit.
No, I think it's just that I read nonfiction and you read fiction.
No, I read almost not only nonfiction now.
Really?
But you do read a lot of celeb memoirs.
I love a celeb memoir.
Yeah.
I love a celeb memoir. Born Standing Up. That's Steve Martin. Really good memoir.
You read all of them. You'll be like, have you read their book? And I'm like, absolutely not.
If I interview
that was
a guest
in 1997, like, no, I didn't
If I
read
interview
it.
a guest, I will read your book.
Yeah.
I will read your book. How are you going to talk to someone and not read their book?
People do it all the time.
I know,
I've gone on to
goofy.
so many shows and realized like 10 minutes in that they have no idea. They haven't read my book and they have none of their own conclusions.
I think it's a sign of respect.
Yeah, to read the book.
Yeah.
Yeah, look up the work.
Yeah.
Okay, so there was another world where we would do an episode because you gave a quote when somebody asked about what we do as friends.
Oh, yes.
You said, actually your publicist called and she said, Ziwe wanted you to know that the things she and Emily do together, she pauses, she wanted you to know that they also talk shit. Yeah. So I just thought there was this, we could have done an entire episode where we would have just done shit talking. Like it would have been like rapid fire. And I honestly want to do it. Like we could have done just the things we text about, like Drake's questionable lyrics on his new album. We could talk about the kind of sex we like after long days of being bosses in our lives. We could talk about VCs.
VCs. Oh, yes. My venture capital pivot.
So next time you come on, are you down?
Yeah, I'm ready to talk shit.
All right. Yeah. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. It was always amazing. I love talking to you.
This is so fun. And I'm so excited to listen to High Low on Spotify and wherever you find your podcasts.
She's so good at promoting me. It's crazy. We'd be in the streets and somebody will ask for a picture. And Ziwe's like, have you bought her book? Do you know that she's a best-selling New York Times author? And these like 16-year-old kids are like, no. Well, it's my turn to promote you. Your new season comes out. I think it's going to be I've seen and heard little bits of it. I think it's going to be the best season of Ziwe.
Thank you.
It premieres on November 18th on Showtime.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks for coming in.
Woo. Thanks for having me.